There are reports of underwater submerged objects the size of a football field moving at hundreds of knots. I have heard either it was from retired Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, or it might have been via Lou Elizondo, that one of these was actually pursuing a submarine. This was reported by the commander of the sub. It was multi-sensor detection. This object was pursuing the sub at a super high speed. Might it have been like 250, 300, 350 knots, something like that, and then made a bizarre underwater maneuver that would not be possible by any known underwater craft, and disappeared at a high speed. So an object that big moving at that speed underwater definitely suggests that either there's a foreign adversary that has a capability that we've not accounted for, our own government has, black budget technologies that they haven't accounted for, or that there is some form of technology operating in the world that is not of human origin.
One thing that's for sure is that a large number of the reports do involve water, and as I mentioned earlier, most of that is completely ignored. There's no monitoring at sea. We've got all the reports that come in are basically from the military, and those are the guys who have the sensors out there. They're the ones with the high-tech sensors, so they're in a position to capture information, and we're hoping to change that. But maybe one thing, just through these exploratory phases that we're going through, is understanding how little and how difficult it is to access data. I mean, there's plenty of marine-based data out there, but it's usually very siloed data. So you would go to one organization and you get access to some data. It would be through some weird web portal that looks like it's built in the 90s or something. It'll be a huge dump of data, but then that data would be maybe in a different format or a different fidelity to data that you would get from another portal, another website. So there doesn't seem to be any sort of uniform, easily accessible database out there that people can tap into and build machine learning models off of and do the kind of work that we're trying to do in the ocean.
Let's dive into Seeker. Let's talk about what is this initiative, this project? Is it an organization? What prompted its development, and where does it stand now in terms of being an actual deployed system gathering data?
Seeker is a for-profit company. The basic idea is to build a network of what are known as uncrewed surface vehicles, and these you can think of as essentially autonomous boats, observatories, if you like, on the ocean, collecting data from below the surface of the water, on the surface of the water, and the skies above. So the idea is to essentially build out this large-scale network that can persistently and consistently monitor these multiple domains, and at the same time perform anomaly detection. So doing object detection, tracking, characterization, and then actually figuring out whether what's being observed is something that doesn't really fit the known performance or biological envelopes of known phenomena and objects. And so that's what the ultimate aim is, to be able to have this large scale networked fleet of unmanned service vehicles, so that if something does appear, we have the situational awareness out there to actually detect it in time, with the data being of scientific quality, so we can make proper conclusions about what we are observing and understand from a scientific perspective if it is something that's actually novel or it's something mundane.
I've got the Seeker website up here. We can go full screen on that. There's a little visualization of one of these. I think your website calls it an ocean sentinel. And
Yes.
and this global network of ocean sentinels operating, I would presume, 24/7, feeding data back up to the cloud. If I may pepper you both with a few operational questions, what amount of the Earth's ocean surface would this project be able to monitor if fully deployed, fully funded, fully deployed?
Well, the ultimate goal is, of course, cover as much of the ocean as possible. We want to be able to cover, you can imagine taking the Earth as a sphere and putting a grid around it, and then each cell has a Seeker USB in there. You can't keep things perfectly stationary on the ocean. That's, the ocean is too rough, so things are going to move around, and we understand that. So, and it's also a big place out there, so we can't possibly expect to cover every square inch of the ocean. But what we can do is have Seeker USV is essentially monitoring cells of the ocean. So each cell in the grid, for example, being monitored by one of these USVs in a circle or whatever, and then constantly feeding information back to our headquarters or back to our customers.
80% of the Earth is water, 90% of that is unexplored. And if UAP are a global pervasive phenomena that is transiting our skies every day at high rate and high volume, wouldn't that also carry into the ocean? And we'll get into this topic of transmedium, this transmedium capability that is one of the 5 observables of UAP. But it's so important, even critical, that we begin to gain access to our own ocean environment. It's like the basement of our house, but we don't have the key, but somebody else does, and something else could be using that environment, transiting it in ways that we don't understand.
All of these observations of the UAPs in the air and in the water, at the end of the day, seems to be emerged. Some of the objects, they stay purely in the air. Some of the objects, they can fly from the air into the water, and some of the objects seems to be in the water consistently. And the first observations, so, we know historically came from one of this flying saucer mythology of Utsuro Bun. I think it was in Japan when the object came out of the water and they just kind of float closely to the shore, and the woman came out with a script and trying to tell something. So it seems to be people observe the things for quite for a long period of time, not only in the water but also in the air. We know that there are objects that can, the one I think that was mentioned by David Fravor in one of the podcasts, that they can fly and merge into the water and they can traverse the water surface, go under and persistently move without any friction. And then some of the objects that can go from under the water and they can stay and they can float under the water. We know from one of our Soul Conference speakers that most of the time they appear during the military training, and so
Right.
one of the objects appeared under the water and has size twice as large as the actual submarine, and they maneuver and their capabilities are extraordinary. They can do things that move quickly and fast, and they are not bothered by any water or any sort of presence of people whatsoever. So one of the example I've heard, and I don't know if I can mention that, but it's kind of probably public already. That's one of the military where I think it happened somewhere near San Diego. And as soon as the military started to test some sort of active acoustic system, they have a couple of spheres appearing on the top of the water. And so 70% of chance when they do it, the 2 objects show up. But at the end of the training, which if I'm not mistaken, lasts for a couple of weeks, there was a large sort of like a submarine approach them at extremely high speed. And that thing was like twice as large as actual submarine that people built. And it positioned itself under their cargo, under the military ship. And they follow the ship while they're doing their testing. And as soon as they switch off the equipment, as soon as they stop testing, that thing just go deep inside. They saw it on the radar, but they were never able to understand what is it. Some of the witnesses claim back in the days in USSR that the submarine people, they've identified some sort of objects, they call them quackers, and these are the objects that emit some sounds in a specific pattern, but they couldn't identify what are those. And most of the things in the water, they either undetectable because you cannot see them, but you can listen them, or like for example jellyfish that can come out of the water, fly in the sky, or do opposite.
Okay, and you're talking about the jellyfish type or structured UAP that's been reported.
Yes.
Interesting.
So you have 2 objects. One of them are staying under, and they are large and they're big. Another one, they can traverse. They can exist in both medias.
What is an anomalous kinematic track, or an anomalous? Is it acceleration? What is it? What would really prove undeniably that this is an anomalous craft of potential non-human origin?
It's pretty much the same as above the water in the sky. So if you have, for example, we can take the use case we mentioned earlier of the object tracking the submarine, approaching it really quickly and then tailing it and then zipping off. So if we detected something approaching a submarine at a high rate of speed and we saw it tailing and then zipping off in a different direction, if we had the proper kinematics of that, we would be able to understand, like, how is that moving in comparison to other submarines, or how is that moving in comparison to torpedoes, which is, I think, what they initially thought was happening, which caused the submarine commander to dive to almost crush depth.
I mean, there are incidents of UAP potentially engaging in physical kinetic altercations with craft. There have been incidents of aircraft disappearing and never being recovered after an encounter with a UAP. So I know it's not a predominant in the record, but it is there. The threat is in part us not knowing, and the world goes about its daily affairs not knowing what's in its skies or under the water. There's talk about a secretive arms race for technologies of potential non-human origin, and that these technologies might have unknown ramifications for the global community. When we imagine a reverse engineered alien reproduction vehicle, as it is being surmised, possibly a triangle, an orb, an object the size of an SUV or a small aircraft, imagine instead an underwater craft the size of a football field, going hundreds of knots, chasing nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed submarines. If you don't understand why we need ocean sensing and the ability to detect, monitor, and better understand the presence of these anomalous craft in the ocean, then I think that says it pretty much full on. So there couldn't be a more important domain for us to increase our awareness and responsiveness within, and to facilitate coordinated international response to. And so I'm very excited about any capabilities we can develop to understand the marine environment and anomalous craft transiting that environment. I think it's a basic capability that the human civilization needs to have. And it is a requisite capability for the international community, if only to avoid the unknown risks and hazards of technological surprise of one another, of miscommunication and miscoordination between nuclear superpowers. And in a hair trigger world where there are many conflicts already underway or about to erupt, we cannot afford to allow there to be craft of these performance capabilities and characteristics operating in international and national territorial waters as they are.